So, my name is Kendra Silvers, and my senior project is on the effects of deforestation. First of all, I'd like to thank my panel for coming and listening to me talk about deforestation today, and hopefully learn something too. So this is my table of contents. I'll start with my inspiration and interest. I'll go to prior knowledge, my essential question, and then I'll go over a few topics of what I will cover, go through my synthesis, and then conclusion. So for interest and inspiration, my project is on deforestation, and I was interested in this topic because I've always been interested in the earth and how I can help keep it at the rate it is now, which isn't good, and I'll talk more about that later, but at least it's livable and we can progress in it. And I was inspired by helping in the most part because I knew that deforestation was a major problem, and I really want to help out and see what we can do to help the earth and keep it on a good track. And then why is it important to me? And it's something we don't know a lot about, so I wanted to learn more about it so then I can educate other people and tell them about it and try to spread the word that we need to do something and make a change. For prior knowledge, I had little to no prior knowledge. I knew that deforestation was a modern day problem, but that was really about it. I knew that it was happening everywhere in every part of the world, and I knew that it was endangering plants and animals in those parts of the world. And lastly, deforestation plays a major role in extinction, and that's really all I knew. So my essential question is, how does deforestation affect animal population and extinction? To start my presentation, I'd like to talk about extinction because it's hard to define extinction. There are many different levels and it's hard to document it. So my first point is that it's hard to document. And at this I'm saying there's different types of extinction. There's local extinction, extinction in the wild, extinction of a subspecies, and then theoretical extinction of the unknown, which makes it difficult to place animals in categories because there are so many different ones. Because of this, there's a debate whether some animals should be protected and some shouldn't, because there are trophy animals that will always be protected, such as elephants, lions, everything like that, whereas there are subspecies that may be more vital in the cycle of the animal food chain, in the food chain, and they're not protected and they can die off, which can create bigger problems. Another thing is the theoretical species extinction and extinction of the unknown, because this happens when a species goes extinct without anyone knowing, so it dies off before it's documented as a species, and so that's hard to say whether it really existed or not, which creates another problem. And then we're losing species at an incredible rate, which is due to deforestation and many other reasons, but because of this we need to look out for what's happening. And I chose this picture because it shows the sixth extinction, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And it shows mammals, how 25% of all mammals are threatened now, how 41% of all amphibians are threatened now, and how 13% of all birds are threatened currently. So for my first subtopic, I'll talk about deforestation. Deforestation overview. So deforestation is the clearing and transforming of an area into cleared land, and it's happening at an alarming rate. Due to deforestation, animals are suffering the most. They need less land and forest cover to survive, and without it, it's almost impossible for survival. A study done says that when 90% of a forest is reduced, about 50% of the species in the forest is reduced as well, leading us into the ongoing sixth extinction. And also, it's the biggest threat to biodiversity happening right now. So the sixth extinction refers to the mass extinction of our species and animal species right now. It's blown up in the last few years because there's been so much deforestation and there's been so much news about it. And it's the most recent extinction since it is the extinction since 65 billion years ago when the dinosaurs went extinct. So I'd like to quickly go over the previous extinctions. There's the Ordovician-Silurian extinction, and this was the extinction of the third largest extinction in history. And it separated over thousands and thousands of years, but it is classified as the first one. And it was mostly sea life, and one of the species that went extinct were trilobites, and that's a picture of a trilobite. The next extinction was the late Devonian extinction, and when this happened, about 3/4 of the species was wiped out, and it was over another several million years, but that was the event, and it was mostly shallow sea life that went extinct. The third extinction was also known as the Great Dying, because it is the Permian extinction, because over 95% of the species went extinct during that time, so the remaining 4% of the species is what life now on Earth all came from. During about 18 billion years ago, the Triassic-Jurassic extinction happened. Sorry, not 18 billion years ago, over 18 billion years. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction happened, and it was due to climate change, basalt flooding, and soon to cause other likely ecological and climate damage. And then this is the most famous extinction. It's the Cretaceous Tertiary extinction, and the dinosaurs did go extinct in that one, and most of the other organisms as well, and examples of plants in the last. This was the last scene of the pterosaurs, which are these birds here. So some examples of deforestation. In Singapore, deforestation has occurred since 1923, and as a result, 61 of the 91 species known have gone extinct. Another example is in Indonesia, where 1.7 million hectaacres, and 1 hectaacre is 10,000 square meters of land, have been deforested. And also in Indonesia is having mass deforestation, and over 20 million hectaacres have been lost. And as a result, many species such as the orangutan and Siamese monkey have gone extinct and are endangered. And one of my sources was by Margaret Kennard, and she stated that in 2005, most of the lowland forest will be gone in Indonesia. Colby Locks is another person who wrote about Indonesia, and he is an environmentalist. He studied 3 lowland forests on islands in Indonesia, and in this he said that over the last 15 years that they haven't gone completely extinct, but most of them have been destroyed, and 9% of the protected areas are losing trees due to illegal logging and forest fires, which isn't part of deforestation, but the illegal logging is part of deforestation. And then catastrophic deforestation is the 20 million hectaacres of land lost, but it's over a long period of time. So there is parts where a forest can lose trees and still be sustainable for animals, but after a while the extinction debt, which I'll talk about later, will catch up and it can no longer be livable. And animals need about 80% of a forest to survive, and so when anything is taken away, it creates a narrow habitat breadth or range, and this is what causes endangerment and extinction. Deforestation also creates more problems, and one of those is vulnerability due to new hunting patterns. So my next subject will be vulnerability. So some examples of this and predator gone prey is animals tend to live in the inner regions of a forest, and where the tree cover is thick and provides lots of protection. Whereas on the outside of the forest, it's thinner protection and less trees and forest cover. So animals can live out there and survive. So when part of the habitat is cut in half, the animals can still live in the normal habitat breadth, but the ones on the inner region can't because they don't have that anymore. So an example of this is Java, Indonesia. In Java, Indonesia, 2 of these birds, which is the black-capped babbler and the banded pitta, are endangered and have gone extinct because of deforestation, and they're ground-dwelling birds. So they were really affected because of the soil erosion and soil degradation. After a while, they just couldn't live in that habitat anymore. And another species was the carnivorous species, because they couldn't find the resources they needed, which I'll talk about again later. But they couldn't find the resources they needed, and so they had to go into different areas, which became easy for hunters to access them and kill them, which was another reason why carnivorous animals are endangered. Another example is the white-lipped peccary. And the white-lipped peccary is a warthog that lives in the southern Pantanal forest in Brazil. However, due to deforestation, the population has decreased immensely over time. And this is because they have to find new paths to get to different landscapes. And due to this, they travel through areas where hunters are more prevalent, and this leads to major hunting and them being killed off very easily. And these hogs are actually a great indicator for the natural landscape because of how they breed. So depending how much they breed is how well the landscape is providing for them. So deforestation also takes these hogs' habitats away, and that causes the movement. And the affecting sites is these animals live in specific sites, and they have specific resources in these sites that they need. And some of the sites have more food or less food, and more hunters or less hunters. And this creates the problem of when they move, they end up being hunted. Once this herd separates, it tends to die off because they can't live alone, on their own alone. And so when they're together, they're better, and they are more protected because they can find different ways and they can look out for each other in a way. But when they're separated, it's not as easy for them to survive. And lastly, due to deforestation, they're taking alternative routes, and I'll show you the consequences of this. So if the animals lived in this hunting area with low hunting and medium food, and this was their primary living area, they would want to live in an area similar to it. But in order to do that, they would either have to cross through low hunting and low food and high hunting and low food. So these two areas are not livable because they have low food. So they definitely want to get to here. And if this area is taken away, then they either have to cross, and by the herd separating in these ways, they cross through either high hunting or low hunting, and the ones that went this way would survive more likely, and the ones that went this way wouldn't because of the hunting. And this is where it creates herd separation, and they tend to die off more. So for my next one, it's habitat reduction. And it's equally important and is another major end result of deforestation. And in turn, these are the consequences. In Southeast Asia, about 168,000 square kilometers of land is left, which is approximately 28% of the forest that is still intact. And this has left the animals little to no opportunity to adjust and be able to create a new habitat. This results in overcrowding, which is when the animals all crowd into the remaining area, which puts high stress on the area, and it dies out because of how much stress it's under. And then interior and exterior, this is what I was talking about earlier, where the interior of a forest has specific needs for the interior of the forest animals, and the exterior has specific needs for those ones. And so when the interior is taken away, the exterior is fine. When the exterior is taken away, then the interior is fine. But when it's like cut in the middle, the exterior are more likely to survive because they can use the resources on the interior because they're usually more plentiful than what they have on the exterior. But the interior ones cannot survive through that. And then ideal habitats is the animals lose their preferred habitat because of deforestation and the resources there. And when they move to a different habitat, it usually isn't quite as good as the other one. So they usually die off and become endangered and extinct because of resources and everything they don't have any longer. So impacts. It usually causes soil erosion, as you can see here, degradation of water quality, uncontrolled burning, CO2 emissions, and fragmentation of their natural habitat. And then in protected areas, there still is declines because of these reasons. So even when animals are in these sites that are protected and no deforestation can happen and no logging, they're still not able to survive because the water quality and the soil quality are just not up to what they can handle. And so as a result, there's major losses of ecological damage, and it's beyond what the animals can take. Then examples of the ecological damage are wind speeds, soil change consistencies, and water flow consistencies. And not only does deforestation affect that, it affects resources as well. Resource loss is yet another huge factor to deforestation because it's another outcome of deforestation. So for new food and water sources, not only do animals have to change their habitat, but they also have to find a new food and water source. And this is a huge problem for large body vertebrates because they need more food and more water to survive. And so as an example for this picture, I said if this was the only water that they had, and the humans had deforested this area and settled here, that animals would have to push back a certain amount. And in this area, there might not be a water source for them. And because of that, they tend to die out because they don't have what they need to survive. And then small body vertebrates are less likely, less extinction prone, because they are able to live with less. And so when they move back, they can live off something, whereas a large body vertebrate would need 3 times that. And then for effects on animals, it goes into the whole soil erosion and nutrient loss, make it harder for them to stay healthy and for the area that they live in to stay healthy. And then specific lowland creatures, such as the banded pitta and black-cap babbler, which I showed earlier, face extinction more often because they are ground dwellers and they can't get away from the soil and they can't get away from what's happening on the ground, and that causes their extinction. And then they also have to find a new source of water, and it isn't always possible, which decreases their likelihood to survive. Then their range factors factor in as well, because they can only go so far in an area before their resources aren't what they need anymore, and they don't have their specific resources. For my next segment, I'll talk about fragmentation and the edge effect. And fragmentation and the edge effect is when a modification of the forest happens. So you can see that here, deforestation occurred in this area and it left this patch of forest livable, and this square patch all has edges around it, which is part of the edge effect, and I'll talk about later. But because of this, there won't be enough resources here to survive, so they would either have to go here or here, and these road systems and the deforested area creates tons of problems for the animals to cross, and they usually can't. So in an article that Barry Brooks wrote, about 77% of island species are considered threatened in Singapore due to habitat fragmentation and modification. And along with that, future extinctions comes with extinction debt. So extinction debt is what happens when deforestation in the past occurs, and it creates a loss of species, but not quite to extinction. But eventually they will become extinct because of time delays. And that's between deforestation, the time delays is between deforestation and the impacts on the species. So highly fragmented forests, such as these ones here, will have no extinction debt because they can't survive. There's no way that animals could survive, so the extinction debt is paid, meaning the extinction happens rapidly. But when there's less deforestation, the extinction debt usually is prolonged and prolonged because the forest can survive for a minimal amount of time, but they can't survive for as long as they should. And then this is another picture I'd like to show because it shows over this time period from 1949 to 1991 how habitat fragmentation and fragmentation of Alberta happened. So you can see here that the forest was plentiful and plenty of room for animals to live. And then it slowly got worse and worse as years went on. Excuse me. And eventually it's almost impossible for any animals to live in this area because of the highly fragmented pattern. Sorry. The edge effect. So for the edge effect, all forests have edges. And if this was our forest here, then you can see this gray box around it, that would be the edge. And usually there are little to no animals living in the edge because of for many reasons, because it's not as protective, there's not as much forest cover, it's too close to civilization, and the resources aren't as plentiful. So when deforestation occurs, all new edges have to be made, which is even more of a loss of habitat for the animals, which creates even more extinctions and endangerments. And so as another result of this is change in wind speeds, which knocks down more trees, which creates more habitat lost. And here, I'll show you kind of an example. If you were to cut the forest here, you can see that the edge effect would happen around this area here. So this whole area would be fine, whereas this area would probably die off. But if you cut it here, you can see that most of this area would be lost, and due to the sizes of these forests, they usually would be able to survive for a minimum amount of time, but eventually they would die off as well. So one of the articles that stuck out to me was an article by William Stevens. and he went over Rwandia, which is a forest in Brazil. And in this forest, the World Bank financed two parallel roads through a forest, and then on those roads, farmers settled, and it created a highly fragmented pattern which made it unlivable for animals, and they lost almost an entire forest due to this. And it really stuck out to me because even though only 10% of the trees were cut down to make this forest, it was a third of the forest that suffered this problem. And then roads, that was an example of how roads would affect it because the World Bank had financed the two parallel roads, and then it went downhill from there. And so this is what kind of happened. So this is our forest here. And when the World Bank financed the two parallel roads, they went through the middle here. So this entire area became unlivable for animals because it's too close to roads. The edge effect is also another factor, and animals can't live in this strip because they can't cross the roads as easily and roadkill. So there was only this space around up here and down here that were livable for animals. And then on these roads, farmers started to settle. So by creating this highly fragmented pattern around the farmers' houses, it made it impossible for animals to live anywhere near there. So then this area is not inhabitable for any more animals, leaving this tiny strip on both sides, all that the animals had left. And because of that, the habitat was reduced so greatly that this could only probably be sustainable for a few years, maybe 5 to 10. But after that, the resources aren't enough to hold all of these animals that were in here on this tiny strip out here, making an entire loss of a forest due to two parallel roads. So as a recap, my essential question is, how does deforestation affect animal population and extinction? And now I would like to synthesize all of the information I have given to you. So I'll start with some maps. This map shows deforestation and the forest that it has affected. So the green is the forests here now, and then the red is the projected deforestation in the next 20 years. One of my sources, by Matthew Sturberg, focused on the Borno forest, which is here. And it's in Indonesia, and it mostly focused on the deforestation and how it's affecting orangutans and the Siamese monkey. So they focused here, and in this one, it said about, I think it was 10 million hectares had been lost at that point, and the Siamese monkey and orangutans had already had drastic effects. Their species levels and population had dropped greatly. So just seeing that 22 million hectares are the projected loss is basically the entailment of an extinction there. And then another article I found, also focused in Indonesia, was by Margaret Kennard, and she focused on the Samarda forest here, and it has 5.5 million hectares. And you can see that almost the entire thing is likely to be gone by deforestation in the next 20 years. And then she also focused on the Siamese monkey and orangutans, because in this area that's their primary area where they inhabit. And once again, that showed that deforestation is going to affect these animals in drastic ways. So another article I had focused on Singapore, which is right here. It didn't focus on this Great Mekong forest, but it focused on some lowland, low breath areas. And it was by Barry Brooks. And he said that 13 to 42% of the species is going to be affected by deforestation in the next 20 years. And then I'll show you. So these are just a few of the mangrove places that are going to be affected by deforestation in the next 20 years. And you can see that there are a lot, but their numbers were greater, and they are already losing effect. The next one I focused on was the Atlantic forest in Brazil. And you can see here that this yellow was all the original forest, and the green is the only thing remaining. So you can see how deforestation has occurred and how much it has affected, and how an animal that had all of this area can no longer live in something that small. And then for the rest of my sources, they all fell within the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. So they all focused in this general area, and you can just see the numbers on how much is being affected because of deforestation. And lastly, this map shows the most deforested areas in 2012. So you can see that Brazil is losing trees and habitats at an alarming rate, whereas other places aren't as bad. Red is the worst the most amount of deforestation. Orange is less. Then this darker yellow color, and then the greenish yellow color, and then gray we don't have information on. But it just was an eye-opening fact to see that it's happening everywhere, and just some places are worse than others. So for deforestation as a whole, throughout all my sources they had a common theme, that deforestation is happening and that it's a serious problem, and that it's affecting not only our animals but the climate and resources that they have overall. And so I made the eye-opening connection that it can happen anywhere and that no landscape is safe. So we all need to think about what is going to happen and get into action. And so one name that was in half of my sources was Navajo Sodahi, and he did an amazing job at backing up not only himself, but backing up other people. And so he has written 18 peer-reviewed essays and 3 book chapters and a book in itself, and he's described as one of the top minds in this field. So he gave the facts and statistics on deforestation, but he also explained the effect it had on the animals. So not only was he just rolling out facts, but he really dug deep to say, and this is what is happening. So he kind of helped me synthesize all together, because it was hard to not see what he was doing. And so he also tied things together from article to article. So he wrote one article, Avian Extinctions from Tropical and Subtropical Forests, then he backed it up with statistics. And then in another article he wrote that was similar, he used those facts that he had, and then backed it up and said, and this is how it's affecting animals. So it was great to see that not only can he write about 2 different topics, but he can connect and make ties within both of them. And so with all of this, he aided me in helping with my synthesis, because it really was just eye-opening to see that he was able to do this. And his ideas on extinction and his principles are so far advanced that he was just really easy to understand, and he wrote so well that it made my job a little bit easier, because he was a great source to have. So the overlap is referring to all of my sources as a whole, and they all backed each other up. So they weren't just one meaningless source. They all had a tie to say that animals need to be helped and they need to have help. And then the purpose, and we're all in this together, is that animals are in need, and we need to stop what we're doing and step up to the plate a little bit, because we don't want this to progress any quicker than it needs to. And that's that. So my expert was Volker C. Radloff, and I contacted him by email. And he is a professor of wildlife and forest ecology at the University of Wisconsin. And my question to him was, how many species have gone extinct or become endangered due to deforestation? And his answer was, the scary answer is that we don't know, especially in the tropics. Many species have gone extinct already, but no one described them before their habitat was lost. I thought this was the most eye-opening question he answered that I had asked. To know that someone who studies this for a living and teaches it to students doesn't even know the magnitude of the problem means that we need to do so much more in order to help out. And the fact that he said scary, as that he knows what's happening isn't good for the earth, but he doesn't know how much damage it's causing, and he doesn't know quite how to get there to fix it, was more, I guess for me, was more just a huge wow factor, because it's just, this scope is so large. And then we need to dig deep and find the root of the problem, and that's how he explained it to me as well. So for the outlook on the future, right now deforestation is happening at a higher rate than ever. In about 2080, some of my sources said that 226,000 square kilometers will be lost, which will result in a major extinction of animals because they can't keep up with the change in pace. In order to stop this destruction, we need to take actions. Humans as a whole need to think about less of, think about the repercussions of what they are doing and what's happening to this planet. As well as carbon dioxide levels are higher than they have ever been for many reasons, but lack of trees in the forests aren't helping decrease it in any way. And one informative article by Ruth Graham states that by 2050, climate change could put over 1 million species at risk of extinction. So going down this path is putting a shocking number of animals at risk for extinction, and we need to turn our heads to someone who can't voice their opinions. With all this in mind, we can do something. What if we can save the forests? So in conclusion, deforestation is a common and unhealthy occurrence. It's putting a countless number of animals at risk, and it's a constant in every part of the world. In my opinion, we are a very progressive generation, and I believe that we can do anything we set our minds to. So we have already left a mark in many aspects of this world, so why not do something for not just us, but for the animals as well? And let's take a step in the right direction. And then these are my work site. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So on your map of deforestation charts, so Australia and Brazil, the first map, Australia was all red. What happens to all of the animals? If there's no other forest that they can go to, what do they all die?
Usually larger trophy animals will still be protected, so they'll go into conservation sites and zoos and stuff like that. So some of those animals won't go extinct in the zoo, but they'll go extinct in the wild, which is a whole nother level of the local extinction and extinction of the unknown and everything like that. So they will go extinct in one area, but they might not in the other. So that will happen.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Kendra, I was talking to you before about how I was listening to a story that was talking about increasing logging rights in the Northwest. What policies, if you were in charge, what policies would you suggest to sort of prevent this massive deforestation from happening? It's hard thinking, in just our country, what kind of policies would you suggest?
I would say that a policy that allowed a minimal amount of logging to occur, because we still need that as fuel and we still need trees, but it's just the amount and the rate it's happening at is so quick and so vast that it's just too fast for the animals, because animals can adjust. It's just that the pace that it's going at now, they don't have time to.
Mm-hmm.
So if we just took smaller parts of forests and at more over a long period of time, and we only say took 20% of a forest, because they can still live with 80%. So if we only took 20% of it, and over a long period of time, they could adjust.
Mm-hmm.
And then that 80% would turn into 100% eventually. So then we could eventually take 20% more. And eventually it would be okay, but just that quickly they can't handle it.
And it seemed like there's patterns that are better than others too of the deforestation. So when it was patchy,
Yeah.
and how you said that when it fragmented it in a weird way, compared to moving kind of from one side to the other, or what would be the best sort of pattern that they could adopt?
Usually, they should adopt something where it starts not at a corner, I know forests aren't squares, but
right.
if it started in one area that had an edge, and then slowly moved in, but didn't create more edges or sharp angles or fragmented patterns, then it would be still not okay, but it would be better than just cutting right through one and leaving patches of forest. So.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I have a question. So, is it possible to reverse deforestation, or is it possible to take actions to rebuild a forest, or once it has been taken away, is it going to take way too long? It won't be in time to save these animals that are there.
So this is actually kind of a tough one, because it was mentioned in some of my sources. So a forest is only completely gone once it's replaced with concrete or industry or anything like that. So there are chances for it to rebuild, but it is the fact that it will take so long that extinction debt will catch up and the extinction will be paid by then. So it takes like a tree, like if you plant a little baby tree, it won't grow for 20 years to be
Right.
this height and size that it would need to have animals to rely on it. So because of that, it will take long, but most of the conservation efforts now are they're replanting trees that aren't like little baby trees, they're a little bit bigger. So that it'll take less time and the animals will hopefully have a chance to like use those as a resource, but it is the fact that it will take so long that usually the extinction debt is paid.
Gotcha. And then one of your maps was interesting because it had America, China, and India as like the countries that were experiencing the least amount of deforestation in the next 20 years. And do you have any sort of like hypothesis for why that is, that those areas are lower?
I think, this is just me thinking, that we have more laws in place. Because in places like Brazil, there's so much forest that they're like, oh, we have a ton of forest, if we just take all this away, it won't matter. Whereas here, we're like, oh, we don't really have like great, huge forests. Like the Amazon rainforest, for example, that's a ginormous forest. So they think that it doesn't matter if they take a huge part away, where they don't realize that it does. Whereas here, they're like, ooh, we don't really have that much forest, so we won't take that much away. And I think that's why, because we just know that the amount we have compared to the amount other places have, and maybe because there's different laws as well. I think that's probably what would most likely be it.
Thank you.
I'm good, I've been living with this topic.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Audience, mom?
No questions?
Well, then Kendra, we'll ask you to step out with your
Okay.
friend and mom.
Okay, Jared, you have to come out first. And
Be as efficient as possible talking about you. Give me some feedback.